Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Viewer Submitted Stories, where I sit by my fake fireplace and read submissions from you, the viewer sitting out there in YouTube land. I started this segment in the earlier stages of my YouTube channel because I realized that my voice alone could never encapsulate the myriad of experiences out there. So I started inviting users to share their own stories on my platform as well. You could submit a story just like the one you're about to hear today, but as a reminder, if you do choose to do so, please be patient with me because, surprise, I'm autistic, so it's a total crapshoot as to when I might get around to reading yours. I mean, there's a small possibility Kanye West might be president of the United States by the time I get to yours. Who knows? Now, before we get into today's story, I did want to mention that I got a lot of great feedback from many of you in the comment section of the last autism story I did, that you really like this segment and would prefer I keep it on my main channel. And because I'm a woman of the people, I'm letting you know I heard you, and I do plan to keep them here on my main channel for now. However, I also don't want to paint myself into a corner and disallow any flexibility for changes in the future because businesses and people evolve all the time. So that is the plan, but I never like to make concrete promises about anything. So let's get on with it. Today's submission is from a viewer named Joanne, and I have to say, this one really resonated with me because so much of what she had to say mirrored a lot of my own thoughts and experiences. It starts out, "Hi Jen, my name is Joanne. I discovered I was autistic several years ago after the diagnosis of my son and had an official diagnosis of autism and ADHD this year. First of all, congratulations on your diagnosis, and already we're hitting on some similarities here. For those of you that have followed me for a while, you know that my son's diagnosis is what led to me discovering my own neurodivergence, and sadly, this is all too common for women on the spectrum who may otherwise never have gotten a diagnosis." She goes on to say, "I remember always feeling out of place as a child, like I didn't belong. On my first day of preschool, I approached some girls playing. They had some elaborate pretend game going on, so I went up to them and just stood there looking at them, expecting them to include me. They didn't, and laughed at me and told me to go away. I went away and got some crayons and drew pictures in the corner. I was constantly in trouble for not being nice. I couldn't understand what this thing called nice was, and apparently being honest and speaking the truth was the opposite of nice. I would be very blunt with people, and if someone offered me something I didn't like, I would just tell them with a straight face, I don't like that. And then I would be sent off to a corner for being rude or mean. I was disliked by many of my teachers and other children's parents. I was rarely invited to birthday parties. I was even called a fussy little by another kid's mother at a fair because I requested popcorn with no salt. How dare you, Joanne? I actually feared going to other kids' houses and having sleepovers because of my sensory issues around food, and knew I'd be in trouble if I didn't want to eat what they provided. I didn't like to eat anything with any kind of sauce. I like to eat very bland food. I grew up as a fairly angry and reclusive child who rarely smiled and believed I was inherently a terrible person. When I went into my teens, I started to crave a fun social life and developed a very fake persona and tried to smile all the time and be as agreeable as possible because, God forbid, I wasn't nice. In high school, I was bullied and kids wanted to fight me because they didn't like the way I looked at them." So we've only just begun getting into her story, and already she's nailing a ton of key points about autism. She touches on social deficits, ostracization, communication differences, masking, and even food sensitivities that she struggled with from a very young age. I, too, always knew I was different and felt like I didn't belong, but could just never quite put my finger on it. And this feeling wasn't temporary or situation dependent. It started in my childhood and followed me every day, even into my professional career. She gives us some glimpses into the difficulty of navigating social expectations that elude many on the spectrum, while most other children just automatically learn it somehow. All she was doing was being factual, and in my opinion, that brings up one of the many reasons why the deficits model of autism is viewed as problematic by a lot of us. Because on one hand, you could say we do have social deficits because our lives are negatively impacted by many of our social differences. I mean, if you were to look at this from a pathological standpoint, we don't call diseases or illnesses differences because they negatively impact our body in some way. But On the other hand, it's not wrong or bad to be blunt or direct or to speak the truth when it's simply done to convey a point and not out of malice. So we like to say that they're only defaults because of how society views us and not because we're doing anything wrong, which is true, but we're still suffering negative consequences regardless. And because of her horrible transgressions of having food aversions and telling the truth, she was left out and bullied. So to fix this, we see she literally becomes someone other than herself, puts on a fake smile, and probably went along with what everyone else wanted to be accepted socially. We do this on a daily basis, which opens us up to being taken advantage of and not knowing who we are anymore. Then suddenly there's all these people around us scratching their heads wondering why depression and suicide rates are so much higher in the autistic population. I had quite a severe mental breakdown at the age of 18 after I'd moved out of home into a flat so I could be closer to the city and work. I had my first boyfriend at the time, and while he was initially attracted to me because he liked the way I looked, as he got to know me, he got disinterested and ended up dumping me for a girl I hung out with. I could see there was some kind of connection they had that I wasn't capable of having with other humans. The way some people seem to playfully bounce off each other in a social manner. It was an impossible feat, and I tried everything I could to be able to do it. I was devastated about this debacle. I felt like I was missing the necessary wiring in my brain that allowed people to connect with others naturally. I actually took myself to the local hospital. I had a 3-week wait for an appointment with a psychologist. When I went to see her, I tried to explain that I felt like my brain was broken and I was different to other people. I explained what had happened with the boyfriend, and she kind of smiled and brushed me off, saying it's quite normal for young girls my age to experience this type of thing. I left feeling so alone and hopeless and went into a deep depression because I couldn't articulate my perceived malady. See, this is why girls don't get diagnosed. I just feel like my brain is wired so differently from other people, you know? No, silly. People don't have differently wired brains. What you have there is a case of being a regular teenage girl. Now go get out there and socialize. It'll make you feel so much better. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it is just a case of being a regular teenager or going through a tough time or whatever. But this is why it's so important to have mental health professionals who are able to read between the lines and pick up on things that might indicate something bigger. And I feel around the frustration of not being able to communicate. The way I've tried to describe this in the past is like being stuck inside your human shell, banging on the inside and yelling as loud as you can. But those on the outside only hear muffled yelling and can't quite make out what you're saying. Like, you're alive in there, and you're you, and in your head, you think you're speaking perfectly clear. So why isn't anyone understanding what you're saying? This is why you oftentimes hear people say it feels like we're speaking a different language. In the subsequent years, I researched a lot, as much as I could, about what might be different about me. I booked a few other appointments with psychiatrists, but never attended. I suspected it may be bipolar, but didn't really resonate with the description of a manic episode. I knew I often felt very inspired and energetic, but would have extreme lows, especially after social events. I went on for years, losing sleep before any kind of work function and having extreme anxiety afterwards. I've actually walked out on jobs because I just couldn't take it anymore. I usually had jobs in retail or hospitality where I dealt with large crowds and busy environments. I was good at getting the jobs because I was so good at masking, but it never lasted. Years later, and I'm in a happy relationship with someone who doesn't see me as defective or lacking and appreciates my quirks. I've managed to build myself a small business that allows me to work from home and avoid things that cause me distress. The anxiety that came with a typical work environment was actually a huge motivating factor behind my success. So, in a way, I'm grateful for it. Did I write this and submit it to myself in my sleep? I feel like I might have been the one that wrote this. The way those words could have come out of my own mouth when you talk about losing sleep before any kind of work function and having extreme anxiety afterwards. I mean, whenever I think about my own social deficits, this is one of the first things that comes to mind for me personally, because work-related functions and professional conferences were like the final boss difficulty level of socialization for me. They were literal nightmares in a lot of ways, and that's why I drank a lot of times in order to get through those functions. And I say that as an admission. not as a promotion, because people with autism and ADHD do have higher risks of substance abuse because of things like this and a ton of other difficulties inherent to these conditions. So, if you can avoid these kinds of coping mechanisms, it's a much safer bet. And I too finally ended up starting my own business prior to my diagnosis. I actually did an entire video on my own experiences of being a small business owner that included some key facts of the higher prevalence of entrepreneurship within the neurodivergent community, as well as a few of my own personal stories. If you haven't checked that out yet, you should go and do so. But basically, a few of the key takeaways I covered were some of the reasons why neurodivergent people start their own businesses in the first place. And among them was the fact that many of us are unknowingly making accommodations for ourselves. At least that was the case for me. I knew I had difficulty coping in a professional environment and in those social situations. I didn't know why I felt that way, and again, this was all prior to my own diagnosis. Basically, many of us somehow just end up finding ways to work with our brains, even if we don't know what's going on with us yet. And like Joanne, while having autism and ADHD are tough, I feel like there are some good things that have come out of it, and I would dare say that my desire to become an entrepreneur was one of them. And as a side note, it's funny how masking does work for us for a while and helping us get our foot into the door of various jobs or relationships, but then we have great difficulty in maintaining them. A major revelation this year about my difficulties with forming friendships over the years. I've always felt as if people hated me, and I used to incessantly ruminate after every social interaction about how I behaved. I tend to rant if I feel comfortable with someone, rant about my life and my interests, and I just kind of expected other people to do the same. If they wanted to talk to me, they would, regardless of whether or not I prompted them to tell me more. I didn't realize I was supposed to prompt people to continue talking about a thing. So when someone started telling me something personal, I'd look away and say something like, okay, waiting for them to tell me more, and they often never did, and then never talked to me again. I think the reason all my friends are very extroverted is because they don't need that kind of reassurance to keep talking to me. I have a small group of good friends, but I still always feel like a bit of an outsider. If I have a one-on-one conversation with any of them, they will happily engage with me, but when we're all in a group, I notice that the other girls all know so much more about each other's personal lives, like it's such a natural thing, doing the small talk and such. Years ago, this made me feel very insecure, but now I just sit back and smile, and it doesn't bother me at all. I'm different, and we all appreciate each other in different ways. I'm glad I know this now, that you're supposed to prompt people to continue a conversation, but it feels awkward to me because if people do the same to me, try to steer me off my ideal line of dialogue, I get really uncomfortable and don't like people pushing me for more personal information than I want to give. So it's still hard to determine if I'm being overly nosy or just having a conversation. Yes, the incessant ruminations after every single interaction with human beings and feeling like no one likes us. But can you blame us when oftentimes we do have difficulty maintaining relationships due to miscommunications and different thinking styles like this? Yeah, if you want to tell me more, you'll tell me more, right? But no, saying okay in response to someone telling you something could be interpreted as being dismissive or that you're disinterested. And these are the types of things that come through the school of hard knocks for many of us. Now, for me personally, I actually love it when people ask me questions because I'm not the greatest at generating conversation topics, but I can answer questions, which are kind of like conversational prompts, if you will. And I consider myself to be an open book, but not everyone is the same way in that regard, and I totally get that. But it does lend to some of that confusion she describes of not knowing if she's being interrogated when she's asking people follow-up questions because she herself feels that way when people ask her follow-up questions. And I can also relate to it being much easier to have conversations mano-a-mano in many instances as opposed to group conversations. And I totally get them knowing more about each other than you do. But again, it's that whole double empathy problem because you know what? Bet you anything that if you're in a group of neurodivergent people and there is just one neurotypical among you, the problem would probably be reversed. Just saying. I find the interaction between autism and ADHD very interesting. I've always been a very fun-seeking person and love novelty. But I would always have a mild panic attack after all my interactions because I felt so awkward and would ruminate on it, and it would consume so much of my energy. I'm so glad I can begin to understand how my brain works now and enjoy all the things I want to do and stop wasting energy trying to be something I'll never be. It's enabled me to be myself and accept that, yes, maybe I do come across as a bit rude or abrupt or disinterested to some people. And really, that's okay. It's not the end of the world, and it's not high school anymore. So it's unlikely that someone will want to beat me up because I stared at them for too long or didn't look at them at all while they were talking. There are a lot of people who like hearing an eccentric person rant about something they're passionate about and don't take offense to social ungracefulness. I've achieved a lot more in 1 year than I have in my whole life, because I can focus my time and energy on what I can do to better my life and not to stress over the unimportant things that I can't change anyway, such as the fact that I'm a bit weird and awkward. I didn't make a public announcement about my diagnosis, but I step select people and I've met a lot of other neurodiverse people as a result. So, as a word of encouragement, I actually agree that people are attracted to eccentricities. So you might find that people are more okay with you being true to yourself as someone who is different and interesting than you might think. And we're able to wrap this one up with yet another example of understanding why the way we are can bring us so much understanding of ourselves, which can help us stop beating ourselves up as much as we used to for our differences and the things we can't change about ourselves. And it can allow us to finally start embracing ourselves for what we actually are. Like I've said before, I've always loved that quote by Albert Einstein where he says, if you judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree, he will go his whole life thinking he is stupid. Like, what if we flipped the script and started judging those dang koala bears by their ability to swim? Okay, let's not pick on the koala bears because they're super cute and adorable, but you know what I mean. And thank God we're not in high school anymore, because I don't know about y'all, but those were some of the worst years of my life and something I would never want to revisit. And from what I've seen, that's a pretty true statement for a lot of us autistics. I mean, don't get me wrong, we still deal with ostracization and social hierarchies and all that crap as adults, as well as the increased demands in our life. But I can say, at least for me personally, it is still way better for me now than it was in high school. And yes, the combination of ADHD and autism is super interesting. I can totally see why someone who has both conditions could think that they have bipolar, because we do almost have this dichotomous nature about us where we have the ability to seek novelty and be spontaneous, but also getting super drained with social interactions and having a whole slew of other autistic issues like sensory sensitivity, social communication difficulties, and feeling like we never fit in. I feel like the difference here might be that these traits are pretty consistent on a daily basis. I mean, yeah, we all have good days and bad days and go through seasons of life and whatnot, but it's not the extreme of having manic episodes for a long period of time where almost all the negative stuff gets turned off and vice versa. Like, you're not going to have a 6-week period of all your autistic traits completely disappearing and you only having the novelty seeking and spontaneous side of you going on, if that makes any sense. You pretty much experience both all the time to some extent. With all of that said, yes, it's great that we can get a better understanding of ourselves, but a diagnosis doesn't make life magically all better. It's still freaking hard, but at least we can understand the why and make some accommodations for ourselves here and there, which absolutely does make a positive difference. And I can personally say that meeting other aliens living on this planet that are just like me when I thought I was the only one here on Earth has been a godsend that has made me feel so much less crazy and less alone. So stuff like this, as well as having some semblance of patience with ourselves moving forward, can help quite a bit. So I'll end it there. A huge thanks to Joanne for sending this in. I related to so much of what you had to say here, and I'm sure others will too. Thanks for being a part of our community and making us all feel a little less alone. All right, until next time, bye for now. Mwah. If you'd like to submit a story to be read on my channel, please visit neurodivergent.com. Make sure you submit your story through the proper channel, as stories submitted via regular email will not get included in this segment. You'll find a list of suggestions for the type of content I'm looking for, and don't forget to let me know if you're okay with me using your first name. And finally, if you'd like to read these stories without my commentary, you can find those on the viewer submitted stories page as well.